Well, I was gonna plant potatoes today, but it's just too dang wet. We got an inch of rain here yesterday, and the old weatherman here is showing a 40% chance tomorrow, 50% chance of rain the next day, and an 80% chance of rain the day after that. Then it looks like we might get a little dry gap in there. So it's gonna be a little bit before I can plant potatoes. Probably next week is looking like more ideal as far as getting them in the ground when it's relatively dry. Now we've got our ground pretty close to ready. So we've got this little plot here. I harvested the beets, those red beets that were over there. Still need to cultivate this one more time. I'm gonna leave these yellow beets here on the end, and still be another few weeks before they're ready to harvest. And then our big plot over here where we had that cover crop cocktail that we mowed and tilled in last time, this puppy's about ready. If it can just dry out. You can see there, this stuff has broken down pretty good. Everything got incorporated pretty well. We can still see some of those radishes here. They're working on breaking down, and they'll keep being broken down even after we plant those taters. So they're fine in there. So we just got to wait on this guy to dry out. You can see there where I just stepped. It is wet. Hey Tiger, is it too wet to plant taters? Check that right there. That's too wet, ain't it? Just too wet. Now while we're waiting on this to dry, it has given me some time to do some figuring and kind of, just lay everything out and figure out how many rows I'm going to plant of each variety, how many rows I'm going to be able to fit in each of these plots. So both of these plots are a little over 20 feet wide, probably between 20 and 25 feet. So I can fit 5 rows of taters in each one of these plots here, space them out 3 foot apart and give me a little room on each end there. So in this big plot here, I'm going to plant one 60-foot long row of red Norlands, of red potatoes. Then I'm going to plant 2 rows of Kennebec white potatoes, and then 2 more rows of Yukon Gold. And then in this little plot right here, I'm going to plant 2 rows of the Austrian crescent fingerling potatoes, then 2 rows of the French fingerling potatoes, and then 1 row of the Adirondack blue potatoes. So since it's too wet to plant potatoes today, I figured we'd talk about some of the steps or some of the things we need to do to get ready to plant potatoes. Should you cut up your potatoes before planting them? If you do cut them up, how to cut them up, how long to let them sit before you plant them, when to plant your potatoes, all that good stuff. If this is your first time on our channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button down below and that bell notification button so you get notified every time we come out with a new video. And if you are a frequent viewer of our channel, it's always good to have you back. So I've got all 6 varieties of potatoes that I'm going to plant right here in buckets. And the first thing I want to talk about is whether you should cut up your potatoes at all. Now, some people I've seen plant whole potatoes. A lot of people cut them up. What's the difference? And what's going to happen if you do it either way? So, if you plant a whole potato, what's going to happen is you've got lots of eyes concentrated in one spot in your garden or one spot in your soil there. And what's going to happen is, you're going to get a lot of sprouts and you're going to get a lot of potatoes by planting that whole potato, because you've got a lot more plant there from having so many eyes coming off that whole potato. But eventually it's going to get overcrowded and you're going to end up with a lot of small potatoes. So if you don't cut the potatoes, will you make more potatoes? Yes. Will you make smaller potatoes? Yes. So if you're like us and you like growing big potatoes at the expense of having a couple fewer potatoes per plant, then you definitely want to cut them into pieces and plant those pieces. Now right here I've got a bucket of red Norland, red potatoes here that I've already cut, and I cut these about 4 or 5 days ago. So this is a 10-pound bag that I've cut into pieces. Now when you're cutting these, the goal here is to leave 1 to 2 eyes per piece. And a lot of people think that the actual size of the piece makes a difference in the health of the plant or how many potatoes you're going to make. It really doesn't. I don't get super frugal with it, but I have seen people, some people will cut them like this right here and just leave a tiny little piece there and kind of just barely cut all these eyes out. And the old timers used to save these potatoes and actually eat them. Now when I cut mine, I'll just kind of cut them several different ways, like that right there and that right there, and kind of leave that there. So that's got one, whoop, dropped it. That's got 1, 2, 3 eyes on it, so I could probably cut that one more time. And if you really wanted to get conservative with it, you could cut that one more time. So you can cut these into a lot of tiny pieces and they're still going to make good seed potatoes. How frugal you want to get with it is up to you, you know, depending on how far you want to stretch your bag of seed potatoes. Now let's talk about the healing process once we cut these potatoes. And we're talking about H-E-A-L, heal, not H-I-L-L, which is something we do to the potatoes once they start coming out of the ground. So this H-E-A-L healing process here is also called suberization. And what that means is just the skin here where you cut the potatoes, this or the flesh of the potato actually is kind of healing over and hardening over. And that's an essential process if you're cutting your potatoes. You want to make sure they are healed before you plant them. That's going to help to prevent any fungal diseases. And if your soil was to get abnormally wet, say you plant them and you was to get a lot of rain, it's going to help protect these pieces from rotting. Now let's say you're in a time crunch and you don't have time to let these potatoes heal over or suberize, and you know you got a small planting window there, you forgot to cut up your potatoes and you need to cut them up and plant them in the same day. There are some things you can do there. We used to use a product called fir bark dust. It was basically ground up bark from fir trees, and you use that to kind of coat these seed pieces. You basically just put it in a bucket, shake it around, and let that fir bark dust coat these kind of open wounds on the potatoes. And that worked really well. We can't source that anymore. Haven't been able to find any more of it. The company that was providing it for us went out of business. But anyway, if you can get your hands on some of that fir bark dust, that's some good stuff, and that's going to allow you to have a quick turnaround as far as cutting and then planting your potatoes. Some people will also use sulfur, and it works much in the same way. It's going to allow you to cut up them potatoes, you coat them with that sulfur dust, and then you can turn right around and plant them because it's protecting that part. So a couple options there. If you don't have time between cutting them and planting them, there are some things you can put on them to protect them. But in my opinion, it's best to just kind of plan ahead, cut up your potatoes, 4 to 5 days before you intend to plant them, and they'll make it and they'll do really well once you put them in the ground. So we saw those red Norlands earlier. Now let's look at a few of these other varieties we're going to plant. So we've got our Yukon Gold here, which does great down here in the south. We've been growing these for years. They do really well. Some of these pieces are a little big. I probably could have cut up a little more. But these things are absolutely delicious. A good roasting potato, a great baking potato, nice kind of buttery texture, and one of my favorites. That's why I'm planting 2 60-foot rows of them. And then right here we've got our Kennebec white potatoes. And like I said earlier, I've never grown these, but I'm really looking forward to growing them. These are your ideal French fry potatoes. So if you like making your own homemade chips, homemade French fries, this is the one to go to. I can't wait to grow these out and then cut them up in little fries, put them in the air fryer, and that's going to be some good stuff right there. So excited about these, using a lot of these, and that's why we're growing 2 long rows of these guys as well. And then on to some of the more kind of specialty potatoes. We've got this Austrian crescent fingerling here. Now when you hear the word fingerling potato, it has kind of a connotation of being smaller, but these things are huge. And I was cutting all these into 3 or 4 pieces. So you can imagine a potato that's 3 or 4 times as long as that. It's a nice sized potato, and I think you got more potato in these, although they're oblong shaped, than you do some of those red potatoes. So These are supposed to be some of the best tasting potatoes we've ever had. I'm really looking forward to growing these guys. And you see they're nice big thick pieces. So just because it's a fingerling doesn't mean it's small. And the other fingerling variety we're growing here is called a French fingerling. And these are a little smaller than the Austrian crescents, but not by much. You can see that's a big one right there. And these have some nice pretty red kind of speckled coloring on the inside. Makes them really pretty. These are supposed to be very, very tasty as well. Gourmet quality potatoes here. Nice good sized fingerlings. So we're going to plant 2 rows of these fingerlings and then 2 rows of those Austrian crescent fingerlings as well. And then lastly here we've got our blue potatoes, and we're going to grow this Adirondack blue variety. We grew this one last year. It did really well. Nice color on it. You can't see that now because it's healed over, but they have a nice kind of purplish deep blue color to them. And even though this is kind of a specialty variety being a blue potato, these things get pretty big. They get bigger than the red potatoes, not quite as big as the Yukon Golds from my experience. And we had an awesome harvest. This was one of my better producing varieties last year, and so definitely growing them again this year with the Adirondack blue there. And if you've never had some blue mashed potatoes, that's some fine stuff, and the whole family will enjoy it for sure. Now once you cut your potatoes, and while you're waiting on them to heal or suberize, you want to keep them in a cool, dark, dry place. Now you can put them inside your house in a dark room, that would work just fine. But I like to keep them underneath my pole barn here that I'm sitting under right now. They stay dry underneath here, cooler, it's shaded, and not a lot of light. And if your planting time does get pushed back like mine is, so I'm going to end up being about 2 weeks away planting from the time that I actually cut these, don't worry about that. These things will be just fine as long as you keep them stored in the right place. So, you know, if your planting does get pushed back because your garden's too wet and you got them cut up and ready to go, they'll be fine. Don't worry about that. And then the last thing I want to talk about is actual planting time. So we're here in zone 8B, and our ideal planting time is February 14th, or the middle of February. But we planted them as late as early March before, and they do just fine then. So just plant them when your soil dries up enough to plant them. If you're in zone 7, you know, back up a couple weeks, you're going to be planting early March to mid-March. Zone 6, you know, mid-March to the end of March. You've got, you know, probably a 3 to 4 week window in actuality and when you can plant them in your specific zone. Now, some of the old timers out there will tell you that you need to plant based on a certain cycle of the moon, what they call lunar planting. And all I have to say about that is, come on now, y'all. Y'all know better than that. There is zero scientific evidence to support planting by the moon. And if you've got some, feel free to share it in the comments below. I'll be glad to read whatever you have, as long as it's actual scientific evidence and not anecdotal evidence or just old wives' tales or you know, just someone's personal account of, well, I've always did it this way and it worked well for me. Well, that doesn't really mean anything scientifically. So if you can provide some scientific evidence, I'll buy it. But until then, I stand as a firm believer that the moon has zero to do with planting and the success of your crops. Now, some of the lunar planting advocates out there will tell you that it's the gravitational force from the moon, the same force that causes the tides to rise and fall, that's going to affect your soil moisture, and that's why you should plant on certain moon cycles. Now, the moon does affect tidal cycles, or, you know, how far the tide rises and falls. We know that. But the moon has little to no effect on soil moisture. And inland, that gravitational force of the moon is pretty much insignificant. And I can tell you that because I got a pond right there, and it doesn't matter what the moon's doing, that pond is not going to rise or fall any significant amount based on whether the moon is growing or decreasing in size. Now, if it just makes you feel better to plant by the moon, go for it. If it's something your father did or your grandfather did and they always told you to do it that way and it just brings back this nostalgic feeling doing that way, I certainly don't want to take that away from you. definitely go for it if it just, you know, gives you the tingles inside and makes you feel better. But just know that you're gonna have just as good a crop if you plant on one cycle of the moon as opposed to another. What determines a successful potato crop is whether, you know, the weather cooperates. You know, if we stay relatively cool through the spring and we don't have too much moisture, too much rainfall, we'll have a good potato crop. If it gets really, really hot quickly in spring, those potatoes are going to die pretty quickly, and we're not going to have a good potato crop. If it stays really, really wet, a lot of times those potatoes can rot in the ground and we won't have a potato crop. So the success of your potato crop is not going to have anything to do with the moon. It's going to have a lot to do with how cool it stays in spring and how much rain we get. So if your ground is dry and the timing is right for your zone, get those potatoes in the ground. Don't wait on the moon to plant your potatoes. Go ahead and get them in the ground so your plants can get nice, big, and healthy, produce some nice sized potatoes before those plants die back when the heat comes along in late spring, early summer, depending on where you live. Potatoes are a really easy crop to grow in the vegetable garden. If you're not growing potatoes in the garden, you definitely should be. It's one of those first, what we call, you know, or would classify as a warm season crop that we get in the ground. And potato planting time always signifies, you know, it's going to start warming up soon. We'll be getting lots of other crops in the ground very soon. So anytime we start planting potatoes, we always get real excited for the spring garden and everything that's to come. If you've got any tips and tricks as far as getting ready to plant potatoes, you know, cutting them up, storing them, getting them to heal or suberize correctly, put those in the comments below. I'd love to hear about it. And for those of you who believe in planting by the moon or lunar planting, I know I'll be hearing from you guys. So I'll get ready to read all those comments as well. If you enjoyed this video, give me a big like, give me a big thumbs up and a big share, and we will see you guys next time.